And let me start by mentioning something, an alternative way to identify subsurface utilities that nobody mentioned. So I was referring to my grandfather earlier in my introduction, who was the chief engineer of the Milan subway, and his brother was the chief engineer of the Rome subway. But my grandfather actually started in Rome back in the 1940s. And so there was one episode in Piazza Colonna, downtown Rome, when they were, building a subway station. And while the machines were digging, a telephone cable suddenly surfaced, and nobody knew what it was for. And the work stopped. And so my grandfather immediately ordered the crew to cut the cable and see what would happen. And within minutes, several police cars converged on the piazza, interrupting traffic. And it turned out the telephone cable was a secret connection between the headquarters of the National Police and the Ministry of the Interior, to which it reported. And so therefore it was quickly repaired. I don't recommend doing that, but it gives some perspective on methods to identify subsurface utilities. Let me throw out a question to the panel, and then we're going to bring up, we have the audience questions. We'll have the audience questions that audience members have typed or may type into the Q&A, using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. First of all, I was wondering about the adoption of these various technologies you mentioned, and then, of course, the adoption of the standards, because all the various agencies and utilities and contractors that you were referencing vary a lot, of course, in the size of the agency and company, the equipment they have, the training, and so forth. And so would any of you like to comment briefly about how adoption of these various technologies like GPR is going around the country, and how that relates to implementing the standards?
I can kick it off, and then somebody else can jump in. But the equipment that we use for utility locating and detection, a lot of it is understanding the tool that you're using. It's kind of much like what Nikolas and Matteo were talking about with their equipment. You have to understand the accuracy that you're dealing with. You can locate the paint mark marked on the ground fairly accurately, but that paint mark is represented by a piece of equipment that may be anywhere from 1/10 per foot of depth to less accurate, depending on the methods that the locator is using, the signal, the frequency that's being emanated from the GPR unit or from the electromagnetic. So there's a lot of different things going on there, and I think that's the importance of the report. It's telling you the accuracy of the locator seen with the equipment that's being used out there. GPR, like here in California, it's like a secondary piece of equipment. It's not even your primary. Whereas if you go to the East Coast, it's used very accurately and very good on the East Coast because of the type of soils that it's encountering out there. Here in California, we use an EM device primarily. So it's about understanding the tool and understanding the accuracy of that tool that you're using.
I would add to that GPR is always going to be challenging because of it's going to behave differently in different soil types. So if you have clay soils, you can expect that you're not really going to get any kind of depth penetration. But I would say that the technology has evolved, and the education around the technology has really grown. So most people have expectations of that it could be potentially challenging. So when they do their EM locate and then they pull the GPR out of the truck, in a lot of ways they're confirming what they've already found. And if they don't get any results at all, or not so great results, or inconclusive, everybody has to be kind of fine with that. When it works well, it really works well. But this, in the best soils in the United States would be in Florida. And, you're looking at small targets, down 10 feet. So it's really a mixed bag. It doesn't mean that you don't use it. It just means that you've got to take it for what it is.
Nick, go ahead, please. And then let's bring up the results of the poll on the audience use of ASCE standards.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what everybody else said, and that's a bad GPR joke. So I used to live in Phoenix. And so if you're familiar with the Phoenix area at all, you would know that subsurface is a high rate of what we call caliche. Caliche is a very, very dense subsurface substrate, and basically GPR works very poorly there. And so one of the things I'd echo, like I said, do your due diligence, make sure that the technology fits for your location in Phoenix. It really just didn't work. And honestly, if somebody was trying to sell me the technology being on the opposite side of the fence, I sort of felt like they were a snake oil salesman because I just knew better. But, that education wrapped around it is very, very important. And the other thing we haven't really talked about yet, but there are GPR devices now being developed and available on drones. So you've added an extra complexity where now the device isn't even, say tangibly on or next to the ground, but it's flying above the ground. And so, just monitor that technology as it comes as well. So, I'd love to see those polls.
Yeah, we'll get to the results in a moment. Give the audience just another couple minutes to answer. But first, would any panelists like to comment on the adoption of the standards, how that's going, and also that I guess relates to training and just knowledge of the standards.
Yeah, Matteo, I'm happy to discuss kind of how CDOT has adopted the standards. I mean, obviously you saw in our data lifecycle how we've included ASCE 38 early in design and leverage that. In our state statute, it does require us to follow the 38 standard for SU under a professional engineer. I think there was, just kind of back to the technology side, when you look at technology and GPR and all these tools, as an agency, you really have to look at what quality level do I need for my project. And if I need quality level B on something, what tool works? In Colorado, maybe GPR will work in some parts of Colorado, but most of it won't. So there's a lot of different geophysical tools out there, and just understanding as an agency, how badly do I need quality level B on a certain utility, and using the standards to then deliver your final deliverables to an agency is certainly important. But as an agency to adopt both standards, we really feel like there's a return on investment when we come back full circle, and we have very good records to start with when another SU project takes off. So that's kind of the gist of all of that. So.
Thanks, Rob. Does anybody else on the panel like to comment on that?
Yeah, I just want to say that Colorado is way ahead of the game when we talk about the Western United States. We're across the Western United States, and we find that we're in the education business. We're educating agencies, we're educating our clients on ASCE standard 38 and 75. We consider ourselves an ASCE standard 38 and 75 firm, and we kind of put that out there so that when we put ourselves out, then people kind of go, what does that mean? Great thing you asked. Let's tell you about the standard. Let's tell you about what we do so we can educate you on the process. And then the idea would be is at some point, you kind of hitting them all the time that they would be like Colorado and institute these standards as just a normal practice. So, from a Psomas standpoint, we're finding ourselves in the education business as far as the standard and getting people to adopt it.
Okay, so let's look at the results from the poll on. Okay, so it's about 50-50. So there's obviously still a way to go on education and training, or the other way around. We could say that almost half the folks out there feel they're up to speed, which is good. So do we have any audience questions yet? If not, I have.
Matteo, I noticed that Wes Kaisershot's got a question. He's asking, and then this might be for Rob, but how will CDOT and other DOTs adopt? Do you see that one?
Now I'm up to that screen. Yes, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Nick. Since you started, finish.
Sure. How will DOTs require and adopt the new ASCE standards and begin to bring the extra requirements into the scope of services in future RFQs, RFPs? Will this be an overnight requirement for utility engineering firms or a slower roll-up of the new requirements as scoped? How about current and existing utility engineering contracts?
Okay, so would anybody on the panel like to answer that or address that? Well, especially CDOT, I guess, since
yeah, no problem. Yeah, Wes, thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, you look at scopes of work. There's some great documents out there. ASCE has a good publication on scope of work writing. Sue for Municipalities is a good document. That's a publication out there if anybody's looking on how to incorporate Sue services into RFQs and RFPs. But for CDOT, we have legislation around Sue, so we're pushing things out on a more overnight requirement rather than a slower roll-up. Other states that may look at adopting the standards, however they adopt them, may do a slow roll-up to new requirements in their scopes. And so, it's for our agency, we have certain contracts. We have, like I showed you guys in my presentation, different other ways to obtain Sue services, and those master scopes are really the boilerplate that start that out. But it's, I think it's all over the board when it comes to other agencies on how they're going to roll this out, whether it's slow or whether it's overnight. It's really a tough one. But as far as CDOT goes, Wes, just keep in touch, and we'll figure out how to get more things included that may be missing from our scopes or any other projects that are shown. So.
Okay, thank you, Rob. We have a question from Louis Marchuk. Under Sue, do you also include the storm drainage? Surveyors are not properly equipped to perform this task. Manholes which have not been opened in 50 years need special equipment to perform this task. At the same time, in a roadway, traffic control from 15 to 60 minutes is required. And so he's asking about that and what procedures are used to do that. Anybody like to comment on that?
Sure.
I'm happy to, or go ahead, Tom.
Go ahead.
I can just tell you from our perspective, when it comes to survey, traditionally surveyors would collect, all the topography, including storm drain, manholes, and inverts. We segregate the survey out so that all Sue related survey is done under the supervision of the Sue vendor, not under a survey crew that's maybe going to collect the surface topography and the roadway features. So we break that out in the survey, and you hit on it, because surveyors that survey for Sue companies are trained to survey the way Sue companies would like to see the data gathered, so that they can assign the quality levels based on the data gathered. So we break that out into two kind of survey functions when we look at it.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Real quick. So with us, we're a little different, since we're basically what Rob called probably a Sue survey firm. We've trained our surveyors on how to open the manholes, how to basically do a manhole assessment, take a look at what it looks like, properly identify the ins and the outs, how to obtain the invert elevations. And we're doing this all so that we can minimize test holes. Because if they do their job correctly in obtaining those invert elevations, then we can minimize the intrusive work that's done by potholers. And I do recognize that sometimes those manholes are very difficult and sometimes they're rusted shut. And that's where you've got to call it. You got to basically go back to the agency and say, hey, I need your help with opening your manhole because it's rusted shut, or I can't get in order to obtain the data I need in order to get the invert elevations.
Thank you. Another question is, what's the horizontal accuracy of the point man point? And I guess the answer is depends, but
That is the answer. It depends, and maybe Nick will contribute here, but it really depends on that receiver that you're using and what's the service that you have set up for that receiver. You can also come into question about the EM locator. What's the accuracy of the tool that you're actually designating the utility with as well. So it all comes down to the instrument that you're using, right, Nick?
right.
Yeah, I would just follow up with, effectively you would take the accuracy of the GNSS or GPS, then you add that to the accuracy of whatever that peripheral locating device is, unless you're sticking the pole right on there. A safe, if you're looking at survey grade or engineering grade GNSS equipment, usually that's in the sub 2 centimeter range. A safe bet would be whatever your horizontal accuracy, let's say, is 1 centimeter. If you're looking at vertical accuracy, you're probably at 1.5 to 2 times that. But these GPS today will actually report that. But we do recommend that you need to do some check-ins like a true surveying company would, and make sure that it's performing accordingly. But it is going to be dependent on what accuracy that GNSS has.
Thanks. That question was from Radek Grabowski, by the way, and another one from Mark Getz. How do you know if your assets are within the right-of-way? Well, I think there's a simple answer to that, but anybody would like to address that?
I mean, without stating the obvious, I mean, if you've mapped the right of way and you're surveying and locating within the right of way, then I guess you would know your utilities are there. I guess I may not be understanding the actual gist of the question, but as a surveyor, we know where the right of way is, and we're mapping what's within those limits. So,
Yeah, and I will add, within CDOT's rights of way, we require permitting. So a permit is required, and we do have our right of way geospatially referenced into our system that's available to utility companies and those that are installing within a right of way, that gives them an approximate location of where they enter and where they exit or where they're running parallel to. So there are geospatial options to map that or have that available along with the permitting trail of documentation of who's being allowed in the right of way. So I think those combined give us a pretty good picture of who and where they're in our right of way.
Okay. And by the way, audience members, please continue to enter questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like. We may not get to all of them, but we have time for a few more. I have another one here. How many Sioux firms actually do surveying? Very few in Mid-Atlantic perform this task. Anybody like to comment on that?
I can only speak for the Western United States, and it's hit and miss. I mean, in the state of California, a licensed land surveyor or professional engineer has to oversee the mapping aspect of utility work, and sometimes those are consultants that work with utility detection crews and potholers. I know on the East Coast you have companies like KCI that's out there. And others that have their own in-house surveyors. but I think it's kind of hit and miss wherever you're at.
Thank you.
And maybe
Question from-
maybe
Go ahead.
Rob can comment on that. That if you're the SUE, PE in charge of that particular project, don't you have to have a pretty tight rein on the subcontractors and the scope of work and how they're reporting to you, so you can confirm that what they're giving as product is accurate and something you can assign a level to?
Well, yeah, I think, and again, not all SUE firms are created equal. And so you have to be careful of how you select or pre-qualify SUE firms. And I think for us, it's a requirement to have survey under the professional engineer of record of a SUE deliverable. So they should be, that survey task should be under that same group. Now, they could sub it out, but that still needs to be under the professional engineer's supervision. And so if there's SUE firms that have survey that's coming in without their oversight, then that would be a red flag for me. So.
Okay, let's go back to our poll question. Let's bring up the next poll question. Okay, about cloud storage. And let's go to another question while the audience members answer that poll question. Thano Tsiforos asks, DOTs across the country understand the benefits of SUE and have adopted 3802. Has Colorado's mandate, Rob? Rob? Hi, Rob. I was asking a question that pertains to Colorado. So has Colorado's mandate resulted in other project owners realizing the benefits of SUE? For example, private developers rarely do a utility investigation.
Yeah, Matteo, sorry, I had a distraction in the office here, but yeah, I think as far as Colorado goes, we have a state statute around SUE. So whether you're a developer, a local agency, or a state, the state agency, it's the criteria. If it's met for your project, then SUE is required, and it's a little unique here. But I think if other states are trying to adopt something similar, find thresholds that meet with the criteria for a SUE required project, so that maybe it's not every project, but and then I think as state agencies, local agencies tend to adopt what state agencies may be doing that makes sense to them as well, to create efficiency in their projects. And a lot of times local agencies have projects that have oversight by state agencies, so adopting similar rules is helpful. But yeah, I think, again, in our state, it's a little unique. So adoption is more forced than just by will. So.
Thank you, Rob. Let's see the answers to the cloud storage poll question. So 63% feel confident about the security of cloud storage, and 37% do not. So obviously that's a substantial minority, and so there's some issues to be addressed there. Would anybody like to comment on that?
Well, I think that's actually good news. The cloud enables so much to happen very quickly. And, we're utilizing the cloud for real-time, communication between the field and the office. And it's, AWS, SOC 2 compliant, super secure. Everybody has their own environment. So, and we get asked a lot and called to the mat, so to speak, on, can we prove it? And usually there isn't an issue. So that is actually good news for me, frankly.
Anybody else on that? Well, we have a comment from an audience member. Daniel Anderson writes, I think the question about cloud storage isn't that black and white. It depends on the use case for NERC-CIP required data. I feel a lot of people aren't following actually NERC-CIP in most of their cloud environments. For example, IT professionals could access who haven't gone through NERC-CIP training. I'm not familiar with NERC-CIP. Is anybody on the panel familiar and would like to comment?
I'm not familiar.
I mean, I know that NERC is a national energy. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Let's not get into that. Meanwhile, let's queue up the fourth and final poll question while I ask one of my questions. So I was wondering about the interaction between SUM and sort of GIS more broadly, and who has access to some data. So if you're working on a project and you're developing a GIS for an area and have for some reason have an interest in what's underground, how do you access that data, and who stores it, and so forth? I guess it depends a lot. There's but what would typically be a good way to go about getting that data?
Yeah, Matteo, I'll take a shot at this one. But, as far as CDOT projects and related to data that we have in our database, it's not a public-facing database. It's an internal database for all the utilities. But it is available to consultants and internal staff that are either planning a new project or kicking off a new project, scoping a project, and then, as far as providing records to either utility owners or back to utility owners or their SUE vendors, it can be, the digital data could then be consumed, and taken out and used for SUE investigations or one-call requests. We have a SUE ticket in our one-call system that when we're asked to provide SUE records through the one-call system, so that is something that's unique here too. It's we have a design ticket like most states have, but we have a SUE ticket as well that's mandatory to supply records or marks on the ground within 10 days of the SUE ticket being requested. And so we can leverage that to supply data out of our database to maybe the requester. But it's really something where we have requests for data, and then it's supplied through that chain.
So if you need that data, I guess you would poke around and ask state and local DOTs and utility companies who are the ones most likely to have that. Would there be any value to a kind of a map of maps, a kind of a map that shows who has data for various right of ways and so forth? And if anybody tried to do that.
Yeah, so to kind of go down that road, here at Psomas, we actually have an enterprise asset management team, and we work closely with them to go to agencies. We've worked with the city of Milpitas. We've worked with Disneyland, of all places. I mean, because it basically is a city, to produce utility mapping in a GIS format, and we put it on a cloud. And whether we host it, they host it, but we use it for internal and external. If you want to take a look at a system that we kind of model a lot of ours after, the city of LA has something called Navigate LA, and you can go onto the Navigate LA site and you can pull record maps. You can pull a lot of stuff, and it's in a GIS database. And you can do a lot of utility research from that city of LA system. And when we're trying to push out to a lot of cities and agencies, and a lot of bigger campuses, like we're working right now with LAUSD on getting their data into an enterprise asset management system, to where their facilities people can take a handheld device walk through the campus and they can identify where the utilities are, and then also take a look at the records. Does this drain need to be fixed? Does this valve need to be replaced? Giving them the ability to have that information at their fingertips.
Thank you, Tom. And while you're on, I have a question for you. I think it was you in your presentation who mentioned that some utilities are removed from the, some assets are removed from the records, but not actually from the street. And I'm wondering how and why that happens, and whether, and to what extent you have the other way around, in which, I mean, obviously you do have the other way around. You did talk about that, of things being removed or moved, but not properly recorded. But on the first one, the first version, removed from the records, but not from the real world. How and why does that happen?
It goes back to the utility purveyor, and basically it could be expense. It could be that they've sublet the utility to another company. I know when we were working with a petroleum company, they would take a petroleum line and put it out of commission and then put in a new petroleum line. But then they would take the petroleum line they put out of commission, clean it, and then a communications company would come along and then throw their fiber optics down the middle of that petroleum line, because now they've got a natural encasement. So we see different things like that happening. Now, where this whole thing falls apart is if that telecom company doesn't state in their as-built that they are utilizing the petroleum line, or the petroleum company doesn't say, hey, we're subletting this to the communication company. That's where this whole thing falls apart, because now you have bad as-builts. The petroleum company says, hey, and they could do it with X's through the line saying that this is no longer a commission. And then for me, as the design firm, we go out there and we don't think there's going to be anything there, and bam, now we hit a pipe. Why is that there?
Right. Wes Kaiserschott, who's a PE, asks, is the last whole question talking about 811 utility locating companies? If so, I believe there should be an additional box to check that pertains to 811 utility locates. Sorry, I was hearing something. Anyway, if so, I believe there should be an additional box to check that pertains to 811 utility locates are one form of records that a diligent SU provider should use as QLD information only. Sorry, I don't quite follow this, but if anybody has any comments on relating to this about 811 utility company, utility locating companies.
Well, I guess I could say that I'm on board with the 811. Like if you called in a design ticket and they went out and marked something, I would give it a risk level of QLD. I wouldn't feel confident in giving it a QLB level, just because I'm not overseeing the locators, nor do I know personally the locator that's going out and doing it. So from a risk standpoint, I would agree with the QLD level given to an 811 locator. But that's kind of my opinion on that. Rob,
Okay.
do you have something?
Let's go to one more question, and then let's look at the results of the fourth poll, and then let's have a wrap up. So the question is whether GPR can capture flow of water or sewer direction. I think the answer is no, but any comments on detecting or finding out anyway the flow or the direction?
No.
Yeah, I would say no. Outside of popping the manhole and actually physically looking inside to determine the flow, I would say that's the improper use of a GPR unit.
Right, but I mean, so yes, I think it's clear that GPR cannot help with that. If you pop up the manhole, can you just drop something that would float and see which way it goes, or?
Well, by obtaining the invert elevation at 2 manholes, you're going to know which way it flows.
Yes.
And basically, if you were going to do something for a ASE standard 38 level project, you're going to want to dip 2 manholes minimum, so that you know not just the flow of the pipe, but you know the elevation of the top of pipe, so that all construction can be dictated accordingly by knowing where the top of the pipe is.
Is there ever any situation in which there's a backflow, or maybe temporarily for some reason, and so that the elevation does not control the flow?
Yeah, I know here in California, and there could be in other places too, we have some that operate as retention, to where the actual bottom of the pipe is actually retaining water, and until it gets up to the flow line, it doesn't spill over into the flow. So there are those circumstances, and that's where, like, pictures, any additional information you can give the design professional, to show what the inside of this looks like. Because sometimes you're right, Matteo, it's not just about the invert elevations. Is it a retention pond also? Is it ponding and then overflowing into the flow?
Thanks. So let's look at the results of the last poll about how will you work with private utility locator generating maps. Okay, so we have quite a variety here. So almost 60% say that they do that to locate all detectable utilities regardless of as built. And then almost a quarter say to provide a second opinion for one call providers. Obviously there's overlap, people can answer multiple, can choose multiple answers, because another 60% are saying to assist with asset management, 35% as subcontractors performing data collection, and then a few 6% say as competition in the industry. So there's some food for thought there. And on that note, since we have 5 minutes left, why don't you each make any remaining, any comments or thoughts that you didn't have a chance to before, or that you thought of during the panel. Let's start with Nick.
I just want to say thanks for everybody and having the discussion. This is where it all starts, right? Dissemination of knowledge and understanding. We need to be educators, no matter what side of the fence you're on: hardware, software, contracting, government organization. And I would just say, in the world of GNSS, do your due diligence. Sometimes change can be scary, but if you haven't gone down the road and tried something new, it might be time to take a look at an alternative solution. But yeah, just appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you, Nick. Tom?
Yeah, I just want to echo Nick said, thank you for your time. I mean, taking time out of your day to come listen to us talk about something as important as utility detection and mapping. I would say, just as you walk away from this, understand the importance of doing this on your projects. Understand that this is going to save you money on the backside, and that if we don't take care of this now, that our future is going to get bleak. I mean, in California, we see constant issues with our water lines. We have water lines over 100 years old, and if you talk to somebody on the East Coast, you got lines that are 150 to 200 years old. We need to do proper mapping, and we need to do proper asset management, and so that we can provide as-built to our next generation.
Thank you, Tom. Matthew?
I would say that the industry is really changing. There is a digitization happening, and efficiencies are going to grow, and we're a part of that. We're excited about it. And thank you for everybody for showing up and having great questions. I think this was really helpful and informative.
Thank you, Matthew. Rob?
Yeah, again, thank you, Matteo, for leading such a great conference today. And, just keep in mind, again, all of this is just trying to build a better, safer project, for our agency. Using standard guidelines is certainly a way for an agency to not reinvent the wheel. You don't have to start over with things. There's great guidelines out there. There's great technology. Everybody here is talking about, one piece of the puzzle for delivering a safe and reliable project. And that's, we want to put projects out and build as many as we can with the tax dollars we do have. And so it's important to identify a good process for an agency, and we feel like ours is a good example, and hope that everybody sees some value in that today. So appreciate everything, and thank you again.
Well, thanks, Rob, and all of the panelists for your presentations and comments and answering the questions. And thanks, of course, to all the audience members for joining us today. And thanks to the ConnectMii events staff behind the curtain. Please stick around and join us for the virtual network, the Brown Bag Lunch and virtual networking that begins now.